Our story begins with the awakening of the most useless ability in history, a mere 1 cubic meter storage space. The entire school mocks him, calling him a glorified delivery boy, but they don't understand the true terror of spatial laws. Imagine if half of that space was placed over your head and the other half in midair, then snapped shut instantly. Yes, that would create an absolute severing effect that ignores all defense. And what if that 1 cubic meter was divided? What if it were split into 10 smaller spaces of 10 cubic centimeters each? One could find a way to make it lethal. The cold mechanical voice echoes through the awakening hall of Jiangqing First High School as thousands of eyes fall upon him. Wearing a faded old uniform, he walks from the corner to the platform and places his hand on the awakening stone. In this world ruled by beasts and strict social classes, the ability one awakens determines exactly how high they can climb. It even decides if a family can escape their miserable fate at the bottom. So in this moment, everyone is watching. But when the stone lights up, the glow is pitifully weak, a dull gray light that barely covers the surface. It flickers like a candle in the wind. The crowd is silent for a second before erupting into waves of mockery. They wonder what kind of trash ability this is, claiming they've never even heard of something so low-ranked. The instructor looks at the final text on the screen, shakes his head in disappointment, and makes the official announcement. As the words fall, the hall goes wild with laughter. A 1 cubic meter storage space? It's nothing more than a portable box. Even logistics crews would find it too small to be useful. To them, his very ability reeks of poverty. Harsh taunts rain down from every direction, but he simply withdraws his hand and stares at the cold text without any anger. There is no resentment, only a dead silence. He knows well that when one lacks power, emotions are utterly worthless. Just then, a blinding golden light suddenly explodes from the backstage, instantly drawing everyone's attention away. Amidst the gasps, Zhao Ze, the heir of the Zhao family, walks up surrounded by pale gold flames in his lavish uniform. His expression carries an unmasked arrogance. Unlike our protagonist, Zhao Ze was born at the finish line. And now, having awakened one of the top-tier offensive abilities, Zhao Ze sees a future where resources and status will naturally flow his way. But instead of basking in the cheers, he walks straight toward Lenin, looking down at him with an air of absolute superiority. A cruel, mocking smile begins to curl at the corners of his mouth. He raises a finger flickering with flames, pointing it at Lin En's chest from a distance while spitting out every word with biting sarcasm. At the mention of his sister, the stagnant water in Lin En's eyes finally stirs, and a flicker of cold intent flashes briefly. Zhao Ze keenly catches this subtle change, and his laughter becomes even more unrestrained and arrogant. He turns his gaze toward Instructor Wang, speaking not in a tone of consultation, but of a direct command regarding the school's remaining slots. He asks about the scholarship spot for the War Academy, noting it was meant for Lenin. The instructor, pale-faced, quietly confirms it. Based on grades, that spot belonged to Lenin, but Zhao Ze declares it gone with a chillingly flat tone. He speaks with the weight of someone who decides life and death, refusing to let such a talentless person remain in his school. When the instructor tries to mention the rules, Zhao Ze's flames flare up, a silent reminder of who truly holds the power here. In Jiangcheng, the word of the Zhao family is the only rule that matters. The hall falls into a heavy, suffocating silence. Some feel pity, others gloat, all waiting for Lin to break. But he doesn't. He simply looks up at his tormentor. He watches Zhao Ze with a gaze so calm it's terrifying, as if he's looking at a man who no longer has a future. Zhao Ze's smile vanishes, replaced by a dark scowl. He tells Lin to get out, clearly hating that unshakable stare. Instructor Wang sighs and hands over a withdrawal form, telling Lin to sign it and accept his fate as a common laborer. He suggests finding a factory job just to survive. Lin takes the application, looks it over, and picks up a pen. His hand is steady as he signs his name without a hint of hesitation. He hands the paper back and turns to leave. He doesn't argue once. In his world, there is no point in arguing with a man who is already dead. To be honest, it's a waste of breath. As he steps out of the gates, the sky turns dark. Lightning tears through the clouds, and a sudden downpour drenches him completely. But Lin seems unable to feel the cold, walking forward with a numb expression while the second-hand phone in his pocket, its screen cracked like a spiderweb, suddenly begins to vibrate. He answers, only to hear a cold, detached voice from the First City Hospital on the other end. His sister Lingxia's condition has suddenly worsened, and she has been rushed into the intensive care unit. Within the next 24 hours, he must pay 100,000 star coins for her specialized medication. If he fails, they will follow regulations and stop the treatment. The hospital will simply remove her from the ICU. To the wealthy, that amount is just a number, but to Lin, it feels like a heavy hammer crushing his mind. It is an astronomical sum he cannot possibly reach. Desperate, he begs the doctor for just a few more days, promising he will find a way. The line goes dead, leaving him with nothing but the cold dial tone. He stands in the pouring rain, his fingers slowly curling into a tight fist. He crushes the rain-soaked withdrawal form into a pulp. In that moment, the last trace of his humanity seems to vanish from his face. Only resolve and a touch of madness remain. His school is gone, his future is destroyed, and legal paths offer him no hope whatsoever. This world and its rules never intended to let him or Lingxia survive. If they won't give him a chance, he will have to take it. He turns abruptly, heading toward the slums on the edge of the city, a place forgotten by light and order. The further he goes, the darker the path becomes. Finally, he turns into the deepest, filthiest alleyway where even the streetlights fail to reach. Here, his gaze changes completely. He decides he will trade his life for what he needs. But as the thought crosses his mind, a stench of blood and wild beast musk fills the air. It lunges from the depths of the alley. Suddenly, two crimson lanterns ignite in the darkness. Though, to be honest, those aren't lanterns at all. They are eyes. A level 2 shadow wolf, a beast that should only exist outside the city walls, stands before him, known for its terrifying speed. It is a nightmare for any new recruit. For an ordinary person to survive even 3 seconds against such a creature would be a miracle. The instinct to flee enters his mind, but he crushes it instantly. Turning your back on a wolf only ensures a faster death. And so, instead of retreating, he steps forward. He lowers his center of gravity and, with lightning speed, snatches a rusted, jagged piece of rebar from the ground. He holds the scrap metal across his chest. This is a survival instinct forged through pain and broken bones in the underground pits of the slums. When facing a stronger enemy, fear only hastens defeat. The only way to survive is to become even more ruthless and desperate than the predator. Only then is there a slim chance of survival. Man and wolf face off in the muddy alley, and a second later, the shadow wolf moves. It lunges like a black blur, aiming straight for his throat. To be honest, its movements are almost too fast for the human eye to follow. Relying on instincts forged in countless life and death struggles, he twists his body to the right at the last possible second. He saves his throat. However, the wolf's claws tear through his left shoulder and arm, ripping away a large chunk of flesh in an instant. Crimson blood sprays out, and the searing pain makes his vision go dark. But he does not retreat. On the contrary, that agony seems to ignite a hidden spark deep within his bones. With a fierce roar, he uses the momentum of his twist to drive the rebar toward the beast's eye. It is a strike delivered with lethal speed, yet he has underestimated the horror of a level 2 beast. The shadow wolf jerks its head midair. The rebar misses the eyeball, instead slamming into the creature's incredibly hard skull with a dull thud. The metal sinks barely half an inch before getting stuck. Enraged by the pain, the wolf shakes its head violently, and Lin loses his grip. He is thrown to the ground, and what follows is a display of pure, primal savagery as they roll together through the sewage and mud. The beast's claws repeatedly tear at his flesh, while he fights back like a completely crazed animal, abandoning all defense to use his fists and elbows. He even uses his teeth to strike at any vital spot he can reach. 3 deep gashes are carved into his back, reaching all the way to the bone. With blood pouring from his shoulder, his strength and consciousness begin to fade. His movements slow, his breathing grows ragged, and finally, the shadow wolf seizes its chance, slamming him hard against the wall. His head recoils from the impact, and his vision fills with dancing sparks. The heavy predator pins him down, its sharp claws digging into his shoulders and trapping him in the corner. He can no longer move. The wolf lowers its head, its foul-smelling maw less than 5 centimeters from his throat. He can see every jagged detail of its teeth. Despair crawls over him like ice. Yet, in this exact moment, the image of Lingxia's pale but smiling face flashes through his mind. He remembers her saying he would be the greatest ability user and how she wanted sweets once she recovered. He cannot lose. If he fails, what happens to Lingxia? What about the 100,000 coins or the hospital's threat? As the shadow wolf opens its jaws wide, ready to crush his skull, his dying, chaotic mind suddenly falls into a state of unprecedented, icy calm. The pain and fear simply vanish. His resentment and fear seem to be drained away entirely, leaving only 2 things in his world: that approaching wolf head, and the ability everyone mocked as useless, his storage space. He asks himself, what is space? It is an invisible, intangible, yet very real box. And since it is a box, it must have edges that appear and disappear whenever it opens or closes. A thought, mad to the point of genius, suddenly splits his consciousness. What if an object were caught exactly on that edge? Lin's gaze locks onto the exact point where the shadow wolf's head meets its neck. In the next second, he pours all his mental power, all his will, and even his very life force into one crystal-clear command: manifest the lower half of the space over the wolf's head, and the upper half in the air above its neck. He aligns the spatial edge precisely at the junction of head and throat. Close. The storage space snaps shut instantly. The crushing weight pressing down on him suddenly lifts, followed by a geyser of hot, viscous liquid that sprays across his face like an erupting fountain. He leans against the wall, gasping like a broken bellows, and looks down. His pupils contract violently. The shadow wolf's massive body is still slumped over his legs, but its head is simply gone. The cut at the neck is terrifyingly smooth, as if severed by the world's sharpest laser. Fur, blood vessels, bone. and nerves are all perfectly aligned without a single jagged edge. Instinctively, he closes his eyes and sinks his consciousness into his void. A moment later, his whole body shudders. There, floating quietly in the center of that 1 cubic meter space, is the severed wolf head. Its eyes still hold a look of predatory malice and confusion. The cross-section is as smooth as a mirror. Finally, he understands. The truly terrifying aspect of his ability was never the storage itself, but the spatial edge. If anything is caught on that boundary, whether it be flesh, bone, or tempered steel, it is severed by the laws of space. This is no ordinary attack. It ignores physics. It ignores defense, and it ignores the gap in raw power. It is an absolute cut on the level of universal rules. Was the beast's skull hard? It was split in two regardless. From now on, flame abilities, hardening, or bodies of diamond mean nothing if they cannot withstand spatial law. The useless ability in the eyes of the world has finally revealed its true, lethal fangs. He stares at the wolf head in his space, and his lips slowly curl into a grin, the wild, manic laugh of a man who has just torn a path out of certain death. A low, manic laughter begins to escape his throat, echoing through the narrow, silent alleyway. It carries the madness of a survivor and the cold clarity of a man who finally sees his destiny. But Lennon quickly forces himself to be calm. Because right now, survival isn't about joy, it's about money. Enduring the tearing pain in his body, he pulls out a cheap folding knife. Using the basic skills he picked up handling beast materials in the black market, he begins to cut open the shadow wolf's chest. Near the heart, he digs out a fist-sized crystal swirling with a faint blue light, a second-order beast core. It is a remarkably intact shadow-type core. On official channels, one would need a license to trade this, but in the underground market, it is the most solid currency there is. At a conservative estimate, this core is worth at least 300,000 new credits. His sister's medical fees are finally covered, with plenty to spare. He tucks the core into his storage and moves to clean the scene. He drags the wolf's remains to an obscure corner, scattering scraps of meat to make it look like a common beast's feeding ground. It looks like the aftermath of a messy gang fight. Next, he peels off his bloodstained school uniform, tossing it directly into a trash bin. That uniform represented his past, the identity of a submissive student ripe for slaughter. As of this moment, that identity is dead. From the pile of discarded clothes, he pulls out a large, black hooded trench coat. With the last few coins in his pocket, he buys a cheap white plastic mask from a roadside stall. On the mask, there is a strange, unchanging smile. With the hood up and the mask on, a completely new figure appears in the reflection. From now on, the student Lin no longer exists. In his place is a hunter who walks among the shadows of the night. He gives himself a new code name, Zero. It represents having nothing, but also the beginning of everything. Half an hour later, we follow him to the largest underground trading center in Jiangqing, the Black Gold Market. Hidden deep within an abandoned parking garage, two guards stand at the entrance, their waists bulging with hidden weapons. Seeing a figure in a tattered coat and a smiling mask, they immediately mistake him for a weak newcomer. "Hold it," a scarred man says, looking him up and down. "Where did this kid come from?" He mocks the mask, asking if Lin knows the rules, while a bald guard reaches out to block his path. The guard demands a 100-credit search fee. Lennon stops, saying nothing, and simply lets his gaze sweep calmly over the two men. His eyes settle on the weapon at the scarred man's waist, less than a meter long, just right. Seeing the silence, the man reaches for his gun. But before he can even draw it, Lin's mental power pierces the barrel. He activates his spatial ability, opening a rift right at the edge. The space collapses, and with a sharp clack, half the barrel falls to the ground, the cut as smooth as a mirror. Both thugs freeze instantly. The scarred man stares at the stump of his weapon and then at the severed metal on the floor. A chill crawls up their spines. They didn't even see him move. They only saw a special alloy barrel get bitten off by something invisible. The unknown is far more terrifying than mere strength. The bald guard pulls his hand back immediately, sensing the sudden danger. He forces a nervous smile and stammers for Lin to enter. Without a second glance, our protagonist steps into this lawless world. The Black Gold Market is far larger and more chaotic than the outside. The air thick with the smell of engine oil, cheap alcohol, and ozone. Under the red lights, every face is half hidden in shadow. We see mercenaries in exoskeletons and shady dealers hawking illegal medicines. In the corners, criminals exchange intel and bounty lists. Lin doesn't waste a moment, having no interest in the local scenery. He walks straight toward the most imposing three-story building in the center, the Black Gold Chamber of Commerce. Behind the counter, a massive shopkeeper weighing over 200 pounds is busy polishing a gem. Without looking up, he asks what Lin is selling. Lin doesn't answer. He simply reaches over the counter and, with a single thought, drops the fist-sized, glowing blue beast core. The core hits the wood with a heavy thud. The fat man freezes, slowly looking up with greed that he can barely manage to hide. But he is a veteran of the black market. In less than a second, his face shifts into a mask of professional indifference as he inspects the core. He tosses it back onto the counter carelessly, claiming it's low quality and only worth 100,000. "Take it or leave it," he says. This isn't just lowballing. It's practically daylight robbery. Yet Lin doesn't get angry or argue. He simply lets out a cold, quiet laugh. He vanishes the core back into his spatial storage and turns to leave. The fat man panics, realizing he misjudged his customer. Only those who know the true value walk away that easily. He calls out to negotiate, but Lennon keeps walking until the offer hits 200,000. As Lennon continues walking, the man shouts that 25,000 is his final offer. Only then does our protagonist stop and turn halfway around. Under the dim lights, his smiling mask looks particularly eerie. He demands 30,000 on an anonymous black card, making the fat man's face twitch. Ultimately, the shopkeeper grinds his teeth and agrees. Soon, a solid black metal card with no markings is pushed across the counter toward him. Lennon takes the card and leaves immediately. The moment he steps out of the Chamber of Commerce, the fat man's smile vanishes instantly. He signals a burly man drinking in the corner to take care of it. The brute grins, leading 4 tattooed thugs to follow him out. Lennon notices those 5 tails right from the start. More importantly, as he walks, he decides to test a new application for his powers. He picks up a small stone and, in a flash, pulls it into his spatial storage while it is still in motion. Stepping forward, he releases it ahead of him. To his surprise, the stone retains the kinetic energy from when he was moving. It shoots forward like a bullet. He realizes his spatial storage doesn't just cut, it can temporarily store and release kinetic energy as well. A far more efficient plan for a counterkill quickly takes shape. He intentionally leads the 5 men through the labyrinthine alleys of the market. Eventually, we see him enter a deserted third-floor underground parking lot. It is dark, secluded, and completely devoid of any surveillance cameras. It is, quite simply, the perfect place to handle trouble. Sure enough, as soon as he stops, the 5 men surround him from all sides. They block every possible exit. The lead brute carries an alloy machete, his face twisted with the cruel amusement of a cat cornering a mouse. He mocks Lennon for being a good runner, demanding the card and everything else he owns. If they're in a good mood, they might let him live. Lennon turns slowly. In the dim, yellow light, that white smiling mask looks incredibly strange and sinister, which, honestly, is quite fitting for the moment. He doesn't get angry or trade threats. He simply asks, in a voice so calm it lacks any warmth, if their heads are worth any money. The brute laughs at first, then explodes in rage. He grips his blade with both hands and swings it violently toward Lennon's head. The blade whistles through the air. Any ordinary person would be split open, yet Lennon doesn't retreat. He actually steps toward the edge of the blade. The moment the blade is about to strike, the edge of his spatial rift meets the metal first. The sharpest half of the blade simply vanishes into thin air. The brute's hands suddenly feel light. Having lost his momentum against the missing weight, he stumbles forward, completely off balance. Lennon has already glided within a meter of him. He opens his spatial rift, letting the edge overlap with the brute's neck before snapping it shut. With a dull thud, the ferocity on the man's face freezes instantly. A second later, a crimson spray erupts from where his head used to be. The headless body maintains its forward momentum for a moment before crashing heavily to the ground. Suddenly, the air in the parking lot goes deathly silent. The remaining 4 thugs freeze in their tracks. The cruel smiles on their faces are replaced by nothing but the purest, most paralyzing terror. They didn't even see what happened. They just saw a man's head vanish into thin air. Finally, one of them breaks and lets out a panicked scream. Crying out that he's a ghost, the 4 of them turn to flee. But Lennon has no intention of letting them leave alive, and he steps forward. He moves like a shadow gliding across the floor, catching the nearest man. Soon, he stands alone in the center, his black trench coat perfectly clean. He kneels down and calmly begins to search the bodies. A few minutes later, he stands back up, finding that the harvest is actually quite good. He finds several stacks of cash totaling about 30,000 credits and a finely crafted military alloy dagger, storing both in his spatial pocket. He touches the black card in his inner pocket. 30,000 on the card, plus this extra cash. It is finally enough to cover the costs. Behind that eerie smiling mask, his gaze seems to pierce through the darkness, seeing a pale little face resting in a hospital ICU bed. His cold, dead eyes finally show a flicker of warmth as he whispers to himself that he finally has the money to save her. He carefully tucks the black card back into his safest pocket. Without a second glance, he turns and leaves the blood-stained parking lot behind. The scene is swallowed by the shadows. Less than 5 minutes after he leaves, the hurried sound of footsteps echoes through the concrete structure. The fat shopkeeper from the Chamber of Commerce arrives, leading a dozen guards armed with energy rifles and looking ready for a fight. He demands to know where the boy is, cursing that 5 men couldn't catch one. He vows to handle the kid personally once they find him. But the shopkeeper's cursing stops abruptly the moment he sees what lies ahead. The fat on his face begins to tremble violently with shock. His small eyes, usually squeezed into slits, are now wide and bloodshot. Before him lie 5 bodies, discarded like trash in the dark. All 5 have been decapitated. Even his best enforcer, a man who had awakened C-rank hardened skin, was no match for whatever happened here. The leader lies in a pool of blood, and the cut on his neck is so smooth it could practically serve as a mirror. It is a chilling sight. A chill surges from the shopkeeper's spine straight to his head. His legs give way with a heavy thud, and he collapses into the cold, viscous liquid on the floor. His lips tremble and his teeth chatter as he points at the neck, which is as smooth as a mirror. With a voice full of tears and endless terror, he stammers that there are no burns or tears. This was a spatial rift. To use the laws of space with such precision and horror, the attacker must be at least a B-rank peak. No, perhaps even higher. The fat shopkeeper's mind goes completely blank as he realizes he has provoked a high-level figure of the spatial system. He wonders when such a god of death arrived in Jiang City. Meanwhile, the night deepens and the rain finally stops. Lin stores the black trench coat, the smiling mask, and the blood-stained military dagger back into his spatial storage. He changes back into his old-school uniform, the one he once salvaged from the trash, and puts on his faded backpack. Once again, he looks like an ordinary, somewhat frail student. However, while clothes can be changed, a man's gaze cannot. The boy who once carried a hint of inferiority and restraint vanished in last night's rain. Now, we see a different person. His eyes are now filled with an unshakable coldness and sharp focus as he heads directly to Jiang City First Hospital. At the late-night payment window, the nurse on duty is dozing off until Lin slams his anonymous black card onto the glass. The sudden sound makes her jump, and before she can even show her annoyance, she meets his intense, unwavering stare. He tells her to use the best specialized medicine for Ling Xia immediately, noting there are 330,000 credits on the card. He adds that if it isn't enough, he will find a way. His voice is hoarse, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. The nurse freezes, looking down at the black card representing a small fortune, then back at his cheap, worn-out school uniform. The sight of a boy who looks like a charity case producing over 300,000 credits is, to be honest, quite a shock. She doesn't know what to say, but the balance on the card doesn't lie. She quickly changes her attitude and calls for the doctors. Half an hour later, the latest gene repair serum is finally and slowly injected into Ling Xia's fragile body. Only when he sees a hint of color return to his sister's pale face does Lin finally allow his tensed nerves to relax. As the tension finally begins to ebb, the hospital room falls into a deep silence. We see Lin sitting by the bed, gently smoothing Ling Xia's hair. It is only in this quiet moment that the bone-chilling violence and murderous intent in his eyes start to fade away, bit by bit. They are replaced by a clumsy sort of tenderness. Ling Xia is his only anchor in this cold world, his one sacred boundary that no one should cross. Though she is weak from her illness, her intuition remains sharp. Her eyelashes flutter, and as she opens her eyes, she reaches out to grab his hand. She asks in a whisper if he did something dangerous. She can smell a faint, metallic scent of blood on him that he simply cannot hide. She also senses a coldness about him that wasn't there before. Lin's heart stings, yet he manages to force a warm, reassuring smile onto his face. He rubs her head, just like he always does, softly lying to her. He tells her he simply sold his school enrollment spot to a wealthy family. He explains he traded it for the money needed for her treatment. Upon hearing this, the light in Ling Xia's eyes immediately dims. She knows exactly what that spot meant to him and how much he sacrificed to earn it. With tears welling in her eyes, she blames herself for being a burden. She whispers her apologies, but he just pinches her nose playfully. He tells her, like one would a child, that it was just a silly enrollment spot. He says that even without school, he will still become the strongest person around. He tells her to stop worrying and focus on getting better. He promises that once she is well, he will take her to get those candied haws from the south side. Once she falls back asleep, he tucks her in. He watches her in silence for a long time. It is only when he steps out of the room that his warmth vanishes, replaced by something far darker. A murderous intent colder than the night takes hold. It is time to settle the score with Zhao Zhe for stealing his future and hurting his sister. The next morning, sunlight spills across the gates of Jiang City First High School. Yet, as the rays hit Linen, they seem to lose their warmth. He walks into the school with his old backpack, looking just as he has for the last 3 years. However, his destination has changed. This time, he doesn't go to class. Instead, he heads straight to the administration office to pick up a registration form for the social martial arts exam. Since Zhao Zhe stole his recommended path, the school route is dead. He decides to take a much harder, more dangerous, but more direct path. The social martial arts exam is incredibly risky. It is usually reserved for those with no resources who are willing to gamble their lives for a future. It is a path for the desperate who have been pushed to a dead end with no retreat. And Linen, quite clearly, is now one of them. Just as Linen steps out of the administration office with the form, a harsh, grating voice echoes from down the hallway. Well, if it isn't our school's former genius, Linen. Looking up, we see Zhao Zhe approaching with his usual group of followers. He even has a heavily made-up girl on his arm, his face radiating a smug, triumphant satisfaction, which, naturally, he hasn't earned. He looks exactly like a victor who, after climbing over others, turns back specifically to mock them. He stops right in front of Linen. First, he looks Linen up and down with a mocking glance, then sneers, asking if he missed class yesterday to stay home and cry. Linen doesn't bother responding and tries to walk past, but Zhao Zhe grabs his shoulder, his gaze dropping to the paper in Lin's hand. He snatches the registration form away, and as he reads it, his expression shifts from amusement to a sudden, mocking realization. As if hearing the world's greatest joke, he bursts into exaggerated laughter. A social martial arts exam form? Everyone, look at this. He mocks the idea of someone with a level 1 storage space trying to take the social exam, asking if Lin is simply tired of living. He asks if Lin plans to head into the wilderness just to deliver himself as a snack for the monsters. His voice is loud, drawing a crowd. Some students whisper that Lin must have lost his mind, while others sigh, thinking such an attempt is nothing short of suicide. Others are simply there for the spectacle, waiting to see Lin get crushed under Zhao Zai's heel once again. They wonder if he will bow his head and accept his fate as he always has. To them, his past silence was merely a sign of weakness. They all assume this time will be no different. However, it is precisely when everyone expects him to break that things change. Zhao Zai throws the registration form onto the floor and raises his foot, wearing limited edition tactical boots worth tens of thousands. He grinds the paper into the dirt, looking down at Lin with a gaze that is malicious to the extreme. He tells Lin that trash belongs in the trash, and that this paper is nothing but a delusion, as easy to crush as an ant. In the past, Lin might have actually bowed his head, picked up the paper, and swallowed the humiliation in silence. But the past is gone. He slowly raises his head, his face showing neither angry roars nor tears of shame. There is only a terrifying, hollow calm. His eyes, dark and frightening, look like two abysses swallowing the light. It was far too fast and far too heavy. The sneer on Zhao Zai's face didn't even have time to fade before he was struck like a man hit by a high-speed beast. His body curled into the shape of a shrimp as he sprayed out a mouthful of bile, his feet instantly leaving the ground. He flew backward more than 3 meters through the air until, with a sickening crash, his back slammed into the hallway's display case. The tempered glass shattered instantly, sending shards flying everywhere. The entire hallway fell into a sudden, deathly silence, as no one expected this. No one thought Lin would actually strike back, let alone kick Zhao Zai into such a pathetic state. Zhao Zai now looked like a pile of mud. He slid down from the pile of broken glass and curled up on the floor, his face pale and twisted in a pain so intense he couldn't even scream. Lin simply retracted his leg slowly, standing in place as if that kick hadn't been directed at a person, but was merely a way to brush off some dust. However, this was far from over. From the crowd behind Zhao Zai, a silent, buzz-cut middle-aged man suddenly stepped forward. His temples bulged and his aura exploded with such force that the floor tiles beneath him began to crack from the pressure. This was a D-rank strength type awakened, a personal bodyguard the Zhao family had specifically assigned to protect Zhao Zai. He was a hardened veteran from the military, and with a thunderous roar, he told Lin that he had quite a lot of nerve. The bodyguard launched himself forward like a cannonball, his massive fist whistling through the air as it aimed directly for Lin's face. The surrounding students panicked instantly, their screams and gasps blending into a chaotic retreat because everyone knew what was coming. To be honest, the idea of a strength type of this level breaking bones with a single punch wasn't an exaggeration at all. Yet, Lin didn't retreat. Not only did he stay his ground, but at the very moment the fist was about to graze his nose, he moved forward to meet it. He didn't just charge, though. Instead, he slid into the man's chest like a drop of water, closing the distance to within a single meter. The bodyguard was momentarily stunned. That confusion quickly turned into a cold smirk, as he believed close-quarters combat was the specialty of a strength type awakened. And so, he immediately pulled back his fist and swung both arms inward, intending to crush Lin's bones and organs into powder between them. Unfortunately, he had no idea what being within 1 meter actually meant to Lin. It wasn't just close combat, it was an execution as space itself began to ripple. Without any wasted movement, Lin simply let a single thought echo in his mind. Space, open, and the edge of his void appeared. The space around his arms rippled as the void closed in. Then, a sound like snapping drywood echoed through the hallway, sharp and sickening. And here, the students and teachers witnessed a sight they would never forget. Just an inch before the bodyguard's fists could touch Lin, his arms were severed cleanly at the elbows. The two thick forearms, still clenched in a crushing gesture, were suddenly separated from his body. They fell to the floor with 2 heavy thuds, the cut surfaces as smooth as polished glass. For a moment, there was only a terrifying silence. Then, as if the world's physics had been delayed by half a second, a crimson spray erupted from those eerily smooth stumps. The blood painted a wide, fan-shaped arc across the white walls. The bodyguard stared down at his empty elbows in complete, hollow disbelief. He looked at his own severed arms twitching on the floor, his fierce expression frozen in shock. It stayed that way until the next second. When the agony finally reached his brain, he let out a scream that didn't sound human and collapsed heavily to his knees. He thrashed on the ground like a dying animal. At this moment, the entire hallway was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was stunned. To be honest, none of them had even seen what Lin did. They hadn't captured even the slightest ripple of supernatural energy. A D-rank strength type's arms were simply gone. Lin, meanwhile, calmly stepped over the wailing man and the growing pool of blood. He walked toward Zhao Zai one step at a time. By now, Zhao Zai's courage had utterly failed him, his face turning as white as a sheet of paper. He scrambled backward on all fours, a dark stain spreading across his pants as he lost control of himself. Lin stopped right in front of him. And then, under the gaze of hundreds of terrified and awestruck eyes, we see Lin slowly lift his foot. With his worn, cheap sneaker, he pressed down heavily onto Zhao Zhe's swollen and distorted face. He ground Zhao Zhe's head into the cold floor covered in glass shards. It was a moment of humiliation, a level of shame Zhao Zhe had never known. Lennon looked down at the face deformed by terror. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the chill of an Arctic wind to everyone present. He told him that he didn't care about the guaranteed admission. During the grand exam, he would shatter everything Zhao Zhe was proud of. After speaking, he lifted his foot, not even bothering to give the boy a second glance. He turned around and leaned down toward the floor. He picked up his registration form, which was now covered in dusty footprints, and gently patted the dirt off the paper. Then, slinging his old backpack over his shoulder, he strode away through a path that the crowd opened automatically. Sunlight streamed through the hallway windows, stretching his shadow long behind him, lonely and silent, yet carrying a weight of pressure that made it almost impossible to look at him directly. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, the old principal was staring at the surveillance footage, his hands trembling as the screen froze on the moment Lin severed the bodyguard's arms. There had been no obvious display of spiritual power, no exaggerated energy fluctuations, and even the spatial ripples were so faint they were practically negligible. The more he watched, the more terrified he became. This meant Lin's ability wasn't a physical strike, but something acting directly on the level of universal rules. The principal grew so shaken that his teacup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. This was clearly not just a level 1 storage space. This was the manifestation of spatial laws themselves. In that moment, he realized that Jiangcheng had birthed a literal monster, and so, he immediately pressed the emergency button, ordering those 3 minutes of footage to be classified as S-rank top secret and sealing all original data. No one was permitted to access it. Not stopping there, he also demanded the retrieval of Lin's entire personal file from the past 3 years. Clearly, he intended to completely reevaluate this student who everyone had previously dismissed as mediocre. However, just as the school realized his true value, the Zhao family had already developed a genuine intent to kill. Inside the Zhao family villa, the atmosphere under the luxury crystal chandeliers was as suffocating as a tomb. Zhao Zhe lay on the sofa with a swollen face, screaming for revenge. He wanted Lin dead at any cost. His father, Zhao Xiong, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, listening to the entire report without saying a word. Afterward, he dialed an encrypted line. The person on the other end went by the name Hound, a leader of a mercenary squad that specialized in dirty work. They were outlaws from the wilderness. Zhao Xiong offered 10 million credits for Lin's life, but upon hearing that the boy had crippled a D-rank bodyguard in one move, Hound immediately raised the price, demanding an extra 5 million to upgrade their equipment for the job. To be honest, they were professionals. They explained they would only be responsible for creating an accident. The traces would be cleaned up by wild beasts, ensuring the military found nothing. Zhao Xiong agreed without a moment's hesitation. In his eyes, no matter what kind of monster Lin was, once he entered the wilderness, he would eventually become nothing more than a mangled corpse torn apart by beasts. 3 days later, with only half a month left until the grand exam, the Jiangxing military and the Education Bureau organized the final large-scale combat trial. The location was set just outside the city. We find ourselves at Wilderness Zone 07. The reason this particular trial has every high school senior acting so frantic is not just because it directly impacts the grand exam rankings, but because the military has offered incredibly lavish rewards, especially for first place. The prize is a Tier 3 energy core of immeasurable value. This single item is enough to make any awaken green with envy. The school grounds are packed with military hover buses. Students gather in small groups, a tangled mess of excitement, nerves, and high expectations. Meanwhile, we see Lin, carrying nothing but a worn-out tactical backpack, standing alone in a corner. He looks completely out of place. After that incident in the hallway, no one dares to step within 3 meters of him. He is like a block of ice, or perhaps a black hole, commanding instinctive awe and distance. Just then, a truly striking figure cuts through the crowd and walks straight up to him. This is Su Shui, the most popular girl at Jiangxing High. She is also the city's acknowledged top genius, having awakened an S-rank ice ability. Naturally, she is used to being the center of praise. Dressed in a white, form-fitting combat suit, her golden blue hair catches the sunlight, making her impossible to miss. She looks like a beautiful yet sharp ice blade. She watches Lin, her voice carrying a hint of a warning and a fair bit of habitual condescension. She tells him the wilderness isn't a school hallway. Since he is only level 1, he should stick with the main group instead of throwing his life away to show off. From her perspective, this might pass for kindness. But to Lin, this brand of kindness, built on the assumption that she is superior, is simply annoying. And so, he merely glances up at her and coldly replies with 2 words, "How noisy." Su Shui freezes on the spot, completely stunned. She clearly didn't expect that lowering herself to offer advice would earn such a response. Consequently, a flash of anger surges through her. With a cold expression, she turns and leaves, throwing back a remark about him being ungrateful and how she looks forward to seeing him fail. Lennon simply lowers his head again as if nothing happened. To him, unimportant people and their unimportant words are nothing more than background noise. Soon after, the hoverbuses pass through the massive Alloy City gates and enter Wilderness Zone 07. This is a different world entirely. We see mutated trees towering into the clouds and thick, gnarled vines twisting everywhere. There is a sense of being watched from every shadow. Every inch of this place reminds them that this isn't a training ground. It is a place where people die. At the instructor's command, thousands of students swarm into the jungle. Most are smart enough to immediately form teams for survival. Groups of 10 or 20 students huddle together, cautiously hunting Tier 1 beasts in the outer zones. After all, for an average high school senior, creatures like little wolves or ironhide pigs are dangerous enough. But Lin doesn't join a team. The moment he steps into the jungle, he breaks away from the crowd and heads alone toward the heart of the forest. His target is a spot on the map marked in bright, warning red. The active zone for Tier 2 beasts. Others fear the danger and seek safety in numbers, but Lin only cares about efficiency. Inside the dense woods, the light is dim. A normal person would check every tree for an ambush, but his mental power has already spread out like an invisible radar. Within a 100-meter radius, not a single rustle of grass escapes his perception. And so, the hunt begins. 30 meters to his front left, a Tier 2 Lone Peak Earth Wasp is coiled in a tree, waiting for prey to deliver itself. Lennon doesn't even slow his pace. As he brushes past, his spatial power flickers open and shut, and the wasp's head is simply gone. Nearby, a Tier 2 stalking cat is devouring a carcass. It is incredibly fast and possesses lethal pouncing skills, but as it leaps from the bushes, its head vanishes in midair before it even hits the ground. The headless body merely tumbles away under its own momentum. Then there is the Tier 2 rock pangolin, famous for its impenetrable defense. Its scales are hard enough to withstand axes, yet the moment it emerges halfway from the ground, it meets the same silent end. Lennon's points, meanwhile, are climbing at a staggering rate. 100, 200, 500, 800. On the giant screen at the Trial Command Center, his name is rising like a rocket, soaring past thousands of other candidates. He quickly breaks into the top 100, and the climb shows no signs of stopping. However, just as he discards the body of a venomous python and takes its core into his hand, a sudden sense of extreme danger explodes at the base of his spine. To be honest, most would have died right then. But his body reacts faster than his conscious mind. Without a moment's thought, he throws himself forward into a low dive. He rolls instinctively into the nearby bushes. At that exact moment, a large-caliber sniper bullet, as thick as a thumb, screams through the air where he had been standing a second ago. It slams into a massive tree behind him with a deafening boom. The trunk shatters instantly, sending wood splinters flying everywhere. This isn't a student trial anymore. This is a professional assassination. Lennon kneels in the shadows of the brush, his eyes turning cold as ice. A high-caliber armor-piercing round, a precision kill shot from over a kilometer away. Given the calculated ambush route and meticulous preparation, we can safely assume the Zhao family is behind this. They want him dead. If that is the case, he decides that not a single one of them will leave this forest alive. A kilometer away, the sniper frowns. He expected this to be the easiest mission of his career, but Lin An's evasive maneuver was far too professional for a student. In fact, he moved like a beast that had survived years in the wild. Soon, the Hound Squad begins to tighten their perimeter. 5 men split into groups to flank him, hoping to trap him in a kill zone. They believe they are the hunters, of course. What they don't realize is that a true hunter never waits to die in the center of a circle. Lin An's mental power is already active. He has locked onto their positions, distances, and trajectories. Instead of fleeing, he stays low to the ground, moving through the shadows. Like a ghost, he moves in the opposite direction, closing in on the weakest side of their formation. The first to fall is number 3. The man grips his tactical rifle, cautiously clearing the area ahead, never suspecting that the danger isn't in front of him, but above. As he passes beneath a massive tree, Lennon drops from the canopy like a bat hanging in the darkness. The man looks up, but Lin An is already within a meter of him. His spatial power opens over the man's helmet, and then it snaps shut. The sound is so faint it's almost non-existent. The squad member doesn't even have time to scream before everything above his neck vanishes. Lennon catches the body, gently leaning it against the tree so it doesn't make a sound. To be honest, it was quite graceful. Soon, number 4 is ordered to check in. He finds the body sitting in a strange posture, only to realize the head is completely gone. In that moment, he goes completely numb with terror, his voice trembling as he tries to report. But that distraction is his final mistake. Lennon strikes again from the side, a flash in the shadows that claims another life. In just 1 minute, the hunt has turned. The Hound Squad has lost 2 men to silent executions, and this is where the situation becomes truly desperate for the attackers. Even the battle-hardened squad leader begins to panic. He finally realizes this isn't a simple job involving a mere high school student. He is facing a demon who harvests lives in the dark. Terrified, he roars for everyone to group up and move toward him immediately. He unleashes his C-rank wind strike ability, creating a wind blade storm. In an instant, countless spinning blades of green energy erupt. The storm of blades tears through everything in all directions, shredding ancient trees, vines, and wood as if they were made of mere paper. A massive area of cover is violently cleared into a mess of ruins, and there, at last, Linen appears within his sight. A savage, triumphant grin spreads across the leader's face, believing he has finally cornered his prey. At the same time, a kilometer away, the sniper who has been tracking this area instantly locks his crosshairs directly onto the center of Lin En's forehead. He pulls the trigger without a second thought. This time, it is a killing blow from a perfect angle. However, Linen doesn't move. Just as the specialized armor-piercing round is about to touch his skin, its spiral wake already ruffling the hair on his forehead. A tiny, nearly invisible storage space quietly opens just a centimeter in front of his brow. And so, that bullet, capable of punching through tank armor, along with all its destructive kinetic energy, is swallowed whole by the space in an instant. No explosion, no ricochet, not even a ripple. As the storm dissipates, and the dust slowly settles, Linen is still standing quietly in the center of the clearing, completely unharmed. This sight causes the Hound leader's mind to go blank for a moment. Linen slowly turns his head, his gaze crossing a kilometer of distance, to land precisely on the hill where the sniper is hiding. His lips part to utter just 3 words, giving it back. In the next second, the void in front of him opens again. The bullet that was just imprisoned by his space is released at the exact same speed it arrived, at the exact same angle, screaming back along its original path. On the hilltop, the sniper doesn't even have time to react. He only sees a black dot rapidly expanding in his scope. Then, a loud crack, the high-precision rifle in his hands, and the specialized scope shatter instantly. The very bullet he fired drills precisely into his right eye, taking his entire head with it. In the communication channel, there is only a short, sharp scream before total silence. At this moment, the Hound leader finally understands. He hasn't provoked a talented student. He has provoked a monster. Consequently, his first instinct isn't to fight, but to flee. He erupts with wind energy, gathering gales at his feet to turn and retreat at full speed. He even condenses his strongest defense, the wind barrier, in front of him. But the problem is, wind is an element. Space, however, is the very rule that governs the elements. Before the true laws of space, that wind barrier, strong enough to deflect shells, was no thicker than a sheet of paper. Linen passed through it effortlessly, without resistance or delay, as if moving through a thin mist. He closed the distance to within a meter, then simply raised his hand. A grab, a closure, a sickening sound, and the leader's head was sent flying. In those severed eyes, a look of utter shock and terror remained. As for the headless body, it stood frozen for 2 long seconds, before collapsing heavily as a crimson fountain erupted. And just like that, the 5-man Hound squad was wiped out. From the first shot fired to the leader's final breath, the entire process had taken less than 3 minutes. Linen didn't rush to loot. Instead, he carefully inspected the scene. He knew quite well that in this kind of professional dirty work, the real value isn't found in the guns or the backpacks. It lies in the communication logs. Sure enough, he soon pulled a glowing military communicator from the leader's tactical vest. The moment he picked it up, Zhao Xiong's urgent and gloomy voice crackled through. "Hound, is the job done? Did you use the beast-attracting incense I gave you? Once that's on him, every Tier 2 beast within 10 miles will be drawn to his location. There won't be enough left of him to bury, and the military will just call it an accident." Hearing this, Lin En's movements suddenly stopped. But the emotion swirling in his eyes was no longer just simple killing intent. He finally understood what the Zhao family was truly doing. They weren't just trying to eliminate him in the wilderness. Their plan was to use that incense to turn the entire outer trial zone into a slaughterhouse. They intended to use the lives of countless students to pave a dazzling, blood-stained path to first place for Zhao Ze. In other words, they wanted to step over everyone's corpses to reach the top. Linen crushed the communicator and turned to search the leader's backpack. Soon, several dark red incense sticks, burnt down to short stubs, appeared in his hand. To be honest, the smell alone was enough. That sickly sweet, rotting scent immediately confirmed Zhao Xiong's words. High concentration, beast-attracting incense, and there was more than one. The Zhao family had truly gone mad. At that very moment, the ground began to vibrate violently. Not a tremor, but a massive upheaval. The soil and fallen leaves beneath his feet began to dance. Then, from every direction, came deafening roars as giant trees began to topple. Dust billowed into the sky, and countless pairs of crimson beast eyes began to light up within the dark forest. This battle had already devastated the outer camps, leaving many candidates injured or dead. If this national exam were to be delayed or cancelled, it would ruin everything Lin En had planned. He had intended to crush Zhao Ze in front of everyone and claim the top spot. If the exam vanished, so would his chance to take the 3 realms energy core. He couldn't let the Zhao family destroy his path like this. He realized he couldn't ignore this beast tide. No one was allowed to block his way, not the Zhao family, and certainly not these monsters. And so, instead of retreating, we see him charge directly into the heart of the chaos. Meanwhile, in Zone C of the outer wilderness, everything had descended into absolute madness. Su Shui was leading a dozen students in a desperate attempt to hold the defensive line. She raised one ice wall after another, barely managing to withstand the initial impact of the horned wolves and iron-skinned boars. But those walls were already spiderwebbed with cracks. Outside, the beasts tore at the ice like a gale, while the students grew pale with terror. Some cried out in despair, while others frantically looked for Zhao Ze. After all, hadn't he always boasted about being the strongest among them? Where was he when they actually needed him? One girl, her voice cracking with tears, finally screamed the truth. They shouldn't count on him. When the wolves attacked, he had pushed Li Ming into their path to buy himself a moment to escape. That revelation extinguished their last hope. Zhao Ze, the wealthy young master who spent his days acting superior and trying to impress Su Shui, had shown his true colors. In a life-or-death moment, his first instinct was to trade a classmate's life for his own safety. Su Shui was furious, but she had no time for anger. The next wave of the assault had arrived. Seeing her ice walls on the verge of shattering, she gritted her teeth and pushed her energy to the limit. She unleashed her ultimate area of effect technique, Ice Age. In an instant, a freezing blue current erupted across the battlefield. The ground for nearly 100 meters was covered in frost, and over a dozen Tier 1 beasts were frozen mid-charge into solid ice sculptures. For a brief moment, she had forcibly regained control of the situation. However, a skill of this magnitude carried a heavy price for her. As the frost settled, she coughed up blood and collapsed to one knee, her face deathly pale and her internal energy completely drained. And then, the Tier 3 commander-level beast appeared, the armored Earth Dragon. At its sight, every student fell into total despair. This was something that should never have appeared in a high school trial, and it certainly wasn't something these exhausted students could defeat. Su Shui understood this all too well. Her internal energy was completely exhausted, leaving her so weak she couldn't even lift a finger. She could only watch helplessly as the armored Earth Dragon lowered its massive head, opening a maw filled with jagged fangs to strike. As the stench of death rushed toward her, she closed her eyes in despair. But right then, a sudden sound tore through the air. A black meteor seemed to rip through the dim canopy of the forest, descending from the treetops dozens of meters above. With a posture that defied the very laws of physics, the figure crashed down. A heavy thud shook the earth once more as the shadow landed. Like a fallen star, the figure slammed into the ground barely half a meter in front of Su Shui, sending a violent wave of debris flying. The shockwave was so powerful it actually forced the Earth Dragon's massive head backward. Startled, Su Shui snapped her eyes open. What she saw was a silhouette, a back that wasn't particularly broad, yet seemed capable of holding up the entire sky. He stood there silently, wearing a faded white backpack, right in the center of a terrifying half-meter-deep crater created by his impact. The dragon's fangs were only inches away from him. It was Linen. In that moment, it felt as if time itself had been paused. The wind tossed his hair as he gripped the standard-issue alloy combat knife he had scavenged from the hunter captain's remains. Though he wasn't a giant, he stood like an immovable mountain between Su Shui and the Tier 3 commander-level beast. He shielded her from the gore and chaos. Su Shui froze for a second before her face paled, and she screamed, "Linen, are you crazy? Run. That's a Tier 3 commander. Even armor-piercing rounds can't break its hide. You'll die." But he didn't move. He didn't even turn his head. The Earth Dragon, now thoroughly enraged, let out a roar so deafening that nearby students fainted instantly. Then, its massive tail, covered in bone spikes, swung around like a steel whip, shattering trees and boulders in its path. Linen knew his spatial ability couldn't swallow the beast's entire head, and normal cuts would be useless against such thick armor. To finish this, he would have to strike at its weakest point, and so, we see him prepare for a high-stakes gamble. Just as the dragon's tail was about to crush him, he bent his waist backward at an impossible, bone-defying angle. The blow missed him by a hair's breadth. Instead of retreating, he used that momentum to kick off the ground and lunge forward. He launched himself forward like a reverse cannonball toward the armored Earth Dragon. Su Shui watched, her face turning pale. To her, this didn't look like a fight. It looked like a suicide mission. Sure enough, after missing its tail strike, the Earth Dragon raised a foot the size of a small truck to crush him. But just as the shadow completely enveloped him, Linen dropped his center of gravity and executed a desperate, limit-pushing power slide. He narrowly slid through the gap of the descending limb, ending up directly beneath the beast's belly. The ground exploded into a deep crater as the monster stomped. Su Shui watched through the gaps in her fingers, completely stunned. She knew, of course, that the belly was the Earth Dragon's relatively weakest point. But relatively is the key word here. The scales there were still absurdly thick, and ordinary attacks couldn't even leave a scratch. However, Linen never intended to break the armor. In the cramped space beneath the beast, amidst dripping slime and mud, he steadied his footing. He tossed aside the now useless alloy combat knife and looked up. Using his heightened perception, he focused entirely on the beast's internal state. He locked onto the massive, violently pulsing heart within the creature's chest. A second later, we see him slowly raise both hands. He pressed his palms against the cold, hard scales. There was no strike, no gathering of physical strength, just a strangely eerie, silent touch. Silently, his spatial distortion bypassed the external armor entirely, opening directly inside the Earth Dragon's chest cavity. This was the moment of truth. His eyes were as cold as a judge delivering a sentence. "Shatter," he commanded, as a cubic meter of absolute dark space manifested. It precisely enveloped the car-sized heart and then violently collapsed. A muffled, wet cutting sound echoed from deep within the monster's body. The Earth Dragon's world-shaking roar stopped instantly. Its massive, mountain-like frame suddenly went rigid, frozen in place by the internal trauma. The tyranny and madness in its crimson eyes faded rapidly, replaced by a primal, instinctive sense of confusion and sheer terror. On the outside, the beast appeared completely unharmed, yet it could feel the very source of its life and power simply vanish. Lennon took advantage of that frozen moment to slide out from under the belly. He didn't even look back. 2 seconds later, the inevitable happened. The massive steel beast lost all support and collapsed with a thunderous crash that made the very earth tremble. Dust and debris filled the air. Su Shui stared blankly at the Tier 3 commander, which had no visible wounds but was now completely lifeless. She felt as if her soul had left her body. Her best efforts couldn't even delay the beast, yet the man everyone mocked as a level 1 failure had ended it with a single touch. The beast had been killed instantly. To Su Shui, this wasn't just a gap in power. It was something she simply couldn't comprehend as Lennon walked toward the carcass. With a single thought, the Earth Dragon's massive heart, the size of a truck tire and sliced as smooth as glass, fell into the mud with a heavy thud. Expressionless, he reached inside the cavity and quickly pulled out an object the size of a fist, pitch black and pulsing with energy. It was the spirit crystal of a Tier 3 Commander Earth Dragon, with internal veins that looked like flowing lava. A rare prize, to be sure. Su Shui finally managed to regain her senses, her voice trembling as she asked what he was. But Lennon only gave her a cold look and told her not to get in his way. Those few words effectively ended any further questions. He then grabbed the Earth Dragon's massive, singular horn and took a deep breath. In silence, he began to drag the beast, a behemoth weighing dozens of tons, and started walking step by step back toward the trial camp. His silhouette, though not particularly large, dragging a mountain-like monster through the dark forest amidst the roars of beasts, looked like a scene from an ancient myth. Su Shui watched this scene, and when she thought back to Zhao Ze fleeing for his life, her disgust for the other man reached its absolute peak. At that moment, Lin An's back was permanently etched into her memory. Meanwhile, we returned to the camp, where the situation was far less heroic. The temporary camp in Wilderness Area 07 had fallen into complete chaos, and their outer defensive lines were on the verge of collapsing entirely. Soldiers were desperately trying to organize the students' retreat. Inside the command center, a colonel stared at the radar as red dots closed in. His face was grim as he berated the intelligence department. It was at this exact moment that Zhao Ze came crawling in, collapsing onto the floor. With tears and snot running down his face, he shouted that he knew how the beast tide started, claiming it was all the fault of that level 1 failure, Lennon. The colonel frowned and demanded he explain himself clearly. Naturally, Zhao Ze immediately began to twist the truth to suit his own ends. He claimed Lin and had somehow obtained high-concentration beast-attracting incense and threw it everywhere, threatening to take everyone down with him. He wanted to take advantage of the fact that Lin and was likely dead to dump all the blame on him, painting himself as a truth-telling hero. Seeing the colonel's face darken, Zhao Ze felt a secret joy and prepared to add more fuel to the fire. But then, something unexpected happened. A series of heavy footsteps that made the very ground tremble began to echo from the camp entrance. Thud, thud, thud. The sound drew closer. It felt as if every step was landing directly on the hearts of those present. Soon, the mist was slowly torn open before their terrified eyes. With one hand, Lennon dragged the mountain-like corpse of the Tier 3 Commander Earth Dragon into the camp, his body covered in mud and grime. His expression was cold, looking like a demon god emerging from purgatory as he ignored every staring eye and walked straight toward Zhao Ze. In his other hand, he held the tactical backpack of the Hound Squad and a communication device that had been crushed into scrap metal. He slammed them at the boy's feet, demanding an explanation from the Zhao family and asking if these belonged to them. It was a chilling moment. The camp fell into a deathly silence, and the fake grief on Zhao Ze's face instantly froze into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Turning as pale as a ghost, he blurted out a question asking how Lin and was still alive, a confession of guilt if we ever heard one. Lin and didn't even bother to answer. He simply kicked the bag open to reveal the burnt remains of the dark red incense and the Hound Captain's ID tag. As the flickering communicator rolled out, Lennon reached down and pressed the play button, letting the evidence speak for itself. Zhao Xiong's dark, urgent voice suddenly echoed through the entire camp, explaining that once the item was thrown on the target, the plan would begin. He detailed how every Tier 2 beast within 10 miles would be drawn in, leaving no remains and forcing the military to rule it an accident. The crowd erupted in fury. It really was the Zhao family. They had hired killers and nearly caused the deaths of everyone present. The colonel's face turned incredibly grim, yet Zhao Ze, still refusing to give up, screamed from the floor that this had to be a setup. He shrieked that a level 1 failure couldn't possibly defeat the Hound Squad or drag back a tier 3 dragon. To him, it was all a lie. Hearing this, Lin finally let out a cold, mocking smile. Level 1. He slowly raised his hand to reveal the truth. A recording played showing Zhao Ze pushing a fellow student into harm's way to save himself before fleeing without a single backward glance. The footage froze on his face, twisted with a mix of excitement and malice. If the audio made them angry, this video sparked a murderous intent. Cries rang out for justice as the students realized such a scumbag didn't deserve to live. And right at that moment, another witness appeared. Su Shui arrived, supported by other girls. Though she was pale, she gritted her teeth and stepped forward to testify publicly. She confirmed that Zhao Ze had abandoned his classmates to save his own skin, and that it was Lin who had actually saved them all. With the testimony of an S-rank genius, Zhao Ze's final struggle was crushed. The colonel took a deep breath and ordered the guards to seize him. As the order was given to transfer him to the highest military court, Zhao Ze completely broke down, his screams of despair echoing through the camp. But just as the enforcement team was about to seize him, a thunderous roar shook the air, demanding to know who dared touch his son. A terrifying pressure swept across the field, so heavy the air seemed to freeze, forcing the students to lower their heads in instinctive fear. Some of the weaker students simply fainted on the spot as a middle-aged man in luxurious clothes suddenly appeared in front of Zhao Ze. This was Zhao Xiong, the head of the Zhao family. Ignoring the evidence on the ground, he glared at Lin and with pure, murderous intent. He accused the boy of slandering his family and ruining their reputation, declaring that today, no one would be able to save him. Before he even finished speaking, a massive hand of energy lunged for Lin En's head. A rank 5 warrior is strong, isn't he? Yet Lin En didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes held a cold desire for destruction, and the space before his forehead began to quietly warp and twist with hidden power. He was prepared to risk a heavy injury just to tear off one of Zhao Xiong's arms. But at that critical moment, a voice shouted for order. A roar even more dominant than Zhao Xiong's erupted as the colonel suddenly stepped in, shielding Lin En from the impending strike. With no flashy movements, the colonel threw a simple, direct punch, and Zhao Xiong's massive energy hand shattered into 1,000 pieces. The terrifying force of that blow slammed into Zhao Xiong's chest, sending him flying backward as he coughed up a spray of blood. He crashed through several military tents before finally collapsing. One punch from a rank 6 had devastated a rank 5. It was quite a sight. The colonel's gaze was chilling as he asked Zhao Xiong if he truly intended to murder a military witness and the trial's top student right in their camp. He asked if Zhao Xiong wanted his entire family buried alongside him, a question that effectively sealed the fate of both father and son. Soon, Zhao Xiong and Zhao Ze were dragged away like sacks of old rags, their influence stripped away in an instant. The elaborate conspiracy designed by the Zhao family had been fully exposed to the public's fury, leaving the camp in a heavy, stunned silence. When the students looked at Lin En now, their shock had turned into deep reverence, and perhaps a little bit of healthy fear. The colonel turned to Lin En, his anger replaced by an open, burning admiration for the young man's incredible feats and bravery. He announced that for slaying a Tier 3 Earth Dragon and saving his peers, the headquarters had named Lin En the undisputed winner of the trial. The colonel took a specialized medal case from his adjutant and presented it to Lin En, explaining it was his reward, a Tier 3 Earth Dragon energy core. After that, he extended an invitation that would make most people lose their minds, officially asking Lin En to join the Eastern Military District. He offered to skip all the bureaucracy and have Lin En join the Songlong Special Forces immediately. As Lin En took the box, he could feel the surging energy within. The heavy stone in his heart finally lightened a bit, but then he looked up and slowly shook his head, offering his sincere apologies to the officer. He explained that before joining the army, he had to use this core to save his sister's life. He rushed back to the first central hospital as fast as he could. But fate, it seems, has a cruel sense of humor. When he pushed open the ICU doors, the sight of his sister sleeping peacefully was nowhere to be found. Instead, we hear the ear-piercing shriek of medical alarms. The room was as cold as a morgue, and on the bed, his sister, Lin Xia, looked frozen. Her entire body was covered in a visible layer of frost, with jagged ice flowers blooming across the metal railings and the edges of her blanket. Her lips were purple, and her chest barely moved at all. On the monitors, every single vital sign was flashing a frantic, desperate red. With his head spinning, Lin En rushed to the attending physician, his voice hoarse as he demanded to know what had happened while he was away. The doctor, drenched in cold sweat and breathing rapidly, explained that the abyss cold syndrome inside his sister had suddenly mutated. It was a malignant mutation. The cold energy now seemed to have a mind of its own, rejecting and devouring any external energy they tried to provide. The gentle energy fluids they had tried to inject were frozen instantly. At this point, the doctor looked at the metal case in Lin En's hands. His gaze shifted between hope and pure dread, noting that the energy of a Tier 3 Earth Dragon core was simply too violent for this situation. Using it now wouldn't save her. It would be like pouring water into boiling oil, instantly detonating the cold energy and turning her into a statue of ice. Those words shattered the hope Lin and had fought so hard for. He stood frozen in place, his eyes drifting toward the little girl on the bed. Seeing her eyelashes covered in frost, all emotion drained from his face, leaving only a deathly, hollow calm as he asked what could be done. The doctor swallowed hard and gave the only possible answer. Within 3 days, they had to find a core with a perfectly matching attribute. They needed a Tier 4 ice soul core of the purest quality to soothe the mutated cold energy rather than fighting against it. Only then would she have a slim chance of survival. 3 days for a Tier 4 ice soul core, an impossible task, to be perfectly honest. A Tier 4 core is already considered a strategic resource, let alone an ice soul core, which is incredibly rare even among its own rank. It was virtually impossible to find on the open market, and even if the military had one, it wasn't something Lin could access yet. We see him waste no time on useless questions. He simply walked out of the room and pulled out that old, black mobile phone. He sent an encrypted message, seeking Tier 4 Ice Soul Core. Deadline, 3 days. Cost, whatever it takes. The reply came almost instantly, none on the open market. 3 in the military armory, but his clearance was insufficient for exchange. The only lead was the Shura Field, an underground arena where tonight's grand prize for the 100-man kill challenge was that very core. The Shura Field was the most blood-soaked, lawless place in the underworld, and the challenge was pure madness. In a single night, one had to face 100 desperate killers from prisons and wastelands in a fight to the death with no rest. In 100 years, only 3 people had ever succeeded. The failure rate was practically 100%, to be perfectly honest. But as he glanced at the flashing red light of the ICU door, all hesitation vanished. If there was no other choice, he would carve a path through blood. At midnight, inside an abandoned steel refinery in the old industrial zone, we find a massive underground dueling arena. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and alcohol, while heavy metal music blared loud enough to burst eardrums. Thousands of spectators were roaring like animals as Lennon, wearing a pale, stiff, smiling mask, walked into the registration area. A burly man with a scorpion tattoo glanced at him and sneered, telling him to get lost because the Shura Field was no place for children. Lennon didn't waste words. He simply picked up the stained death waiver and bit down hard on his own thumb. With a blank expression, he took that warm blood and pressed a crimson thumbprint firmly onto the signature line. He looked up, staring through the mask's frozen grin, and told the man to stop talking and just arrange the 100 opponents. He asked if they were coming all at once or in a line. The big man had seen many lunatics in his time, but this was different. That single look sent a chill down the man's spine. Without another word, he simply handed Lin a black number plate. It was number 9527, and so, he turned toward the iron gate leading to hell. His first opponent, the man known as Black Yuan. His opponent was a peak Tier 2 beast-type Esper, standing over 2.5 meters tall, covered in black fur, and famous for his sheer brutality. The crowd was jeering and laughing, convinced that Lin and slender frame wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps in the giant's teeth. However, the moment the referee signaled the start, Black Yuan lunged with a roar, his massive palm ready to crush Lin and skull on the spot. But just before impact, Lennon simply stepped aside, letting the massive body brush past him. After a soft, sharp sound, Black Yuan crashed into the iron cage. Then, under the gaze of thousands, that head, still wearing a ferocious grin, slid smoothly off his neck as a fountain of crimson erupted. The arena fell into a deathly silence before suddenly exploding into a roar. The name 9527 echoed through the Shura Field for the first time. But as the 2nd, 5th, and 10th matches followed, and then the 37th, the spectators began to realize they weren't watching a competition at all, but a one-sided harvest. A speed-type Esper moved like a blur, but the moment he got close to Lennon, his body was simply split in two. A fire manipulator filled the air with flames, yet Lennon walked through them as if passing through a gentle curtain. A second later, the man's head was rolling on the ground. Whether it was a direct assault, an ambush, or a long-range strike, the result remained the same. 1 hit, 1 kill. There were no wasted movements, no flashy collisions, and barely any process to speak of. He simply approached, and then, the opponent fell. Gradually, the cheers from the stands grew quieter, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence and the sound of sharp intakes of breath. Everyone could see it now. He wasn't here to challenge the arena. He was clearing it. He was harvesting them. By the time the 99th match ended and the referee announced the winner in a trembling voice, Lennon stood in the center of a fallen crowd, the ground beneath him a sea of red. That pale, smiling mask had long since been stained a dark, grim crimson. He stood there, his breathing perfectly calm, as the entire Shura Field remained speechless. Meanwhile, in a luxury box at the top, the master of the Shura Field, Jin Yi, looked on with a terrifyingly dark expression. That Tier 4 Ice Soul Core was meant to be a mere gimmick for a powerful figure in the capital. No one ever intended for it to be taken. But now, Lennon was only one step away from claiming it. Jin Yi sneered and pressed the red button on the wall to activate the cleaner protocol. Jin Yi gave the order to bring out Titan. Suddenly, the massive gates of the octagon, forged from special alloy, began to rumble. As they slowly rose, a ferocious aura 100 times more terrifying than all previous opponents combined surged out like a crimson tide. From the darkness behind the gate, a giant nearly 3 meters tall emerged. His muscles looked like steel pillars, and his skin possessed a strange, bronze metallic luster. With every step he took, the entire octagon trembled slightly under his immense weight. The silent crowd instantly erupted into screams of pure terror. It was Titan, the indestructible Titan. Good heavens! Wasn't he locked in the lowest level of the Black Prison? To be honest, things just became much harder for our masked friend. Titan was a monster known for tearing apart Tier 4 beasts with his bare hands. He walked to the center, ignoring the fallen bodies. His massive eyes locked onto Lennon. He pulled back his lips to reveal rows of white teeth, his voice grating like grinding metal. He told the boy that his little killing game ended here. Now, it was Titan's turn. His voice sounded like rusted iron plates rubbing together. It was calm, yet far more chilling than any roar. "Kid, your killing game ends now. It is my turn to play." The audience froze for a heartbeat before letting out an even louder cry. Everyone recognized this 3-meter-tall bronze monster. This was the cleaner Titan, the Shura field's true ultimate weapon, kept hidden away for moments just like this. Rumor had it that his Tier 4 absolute hardening ability made his flesh tougher than the highest grade alloy armor. Ordinary cutting techniques, it seemed, would have absolutely no effect on him whatsoever. Lin applied his fundamental space compression power. Usually, even tank armor would be sliced clean through. However, with a piercing metallic screech, sparks flew everywhere. The dagger in Lin's hand, which usually cut through iron like butter, shattered into pieces the moment it touched the giant's skin. As for Titan's neck, there was only a faint white mark that vanished almost instantly. Titan finally laughed, a sound that made the entire arena shake. He called Lin a little bug and reminded him that those cutting tricks were useless. He swung a backhand punch with no flashy energy. There were no complex moves, only pure, condensed strength. It was fast, far too fast. Lin could see the trajectory, but barely. His body couldn't quite dodge in time, so he could only cross his arms in a desperate attempt to protect his chest. The punch landed like a high-speed maglev train, slamming into Lennon and sending him flying backward through the air. He crashed into the alloy mesh, leaving a massive human-shaped dent in the metal. And then, the inevitable happened. Blood began to seep from beneath his mask, staining his combat suit. For a moment, the entire arena fell deathly silent. Then, an even wilder cheer erupted. Those who had been silenced by the fear of Lin's 99 consecutive kills now acted as if they had found a new lease on life, screaming to see him crushed. Up in the private box, Genie picked up his wine glass again, looking quite relaxed. To him, Lennon was just a boy with a few strange tricks. Titan represented true power. However, as Lennon leaned against the mesh, he slowly wiped the blood from his mouth. His eyes remained cold and undisturbed. He had reached a conclusion. His standard space cutting wasn't absolutely invincible. When a target's physical density and energy structure exceed a certain threshold, the shearing force of the spatial closure is greatly weakened. In other words, cutting from the outside simply wouldn't work. But there was a problem. He had no time to waste. His sister was waiting, and the medicine was right there. If the outside failed, he would go inside. As Lennon stood back up, Titan watched him with a look of cruel amusement in his eyes. The giant intended to crush him to death, grinding bone and organ into powder. 10 meters, 5 meters, 3 meters. Just as they were about to collide, Lennon suddenly dropped low, ducking beneath that massive, wall-like chest. He moved like a graceful shadow, flashing past the giant's side. At that same moment, he opened his right hand. He gently pressed his fingers against Titan's temple. The movement was almost delicate, like a lover's touch. Titan didn't even have time to stop laughing before Lin's eyes filled with a cold, calculated madness. Space. This time, he wasn't cutting from the outside. Deep within that indestructible skull, inside the core of the brain, he forcibly opened a 1-centimeter cube of empty space. It existed for only a fraction of a second before collapsing back. The most fundamental laws of the universe completed a cycle of creation and annihilation in a mere fraction of a second. Titan froze. His gaze, his expression, and his very movements were all frozen in that single moment. And then, we see it. A thin stream of crimson liquid began to leak from his left ear, then his right, followed by his nose and eyes. 7 trails of blood flowed down that bronze face, forming a truly grotesque pattern. A second later, there was a heavy thud. That mountain of a body collapsed straight down, slamming into the octagon floor. The Tier 4 physical powerhouse was gone. Titan, the legendary cleaner, was dead on the spot. Suddenly, the entire arena felt as if someone had pressed the mute button. The music stopped, the screaming ceased, and every face in the crowd was paralyzed. Thousands of eyes stared at that leaking corpse. They looked at Lin and standing there. No wounds, no struggle, just a single touch. A god had fallen. After a deathly silence, a wine glass slipped from a spectator's hand and shattered, acting like a trigger. In the next heartbeat, the stadium absolutely exploded. Countless spectators screamed and fought to escape this living purgatory, but Lennon didn't pay the slightest bit of attention to the chaos. He simply looked up, his gaze piercing through the crowd toward the luxury box. His voice was raspy from his injuries. yet it remained ice-cold and clear. 100 matches are over. Give me the Tier 4 ice-breaking Golden River. Now. The crowd paused for a moment. He was right. After all, the 100-kill streak was complete, and the prize should be his. However, Jin Yi clearly never intended to follow the rules. He stepped to the microphone, his sneer echoing through the speakers. 95-27, you certainly gave me a surprise. But did you really think your little tricks would go unnoticed by everyone? Titan's body is harder than battleship armor, yet he fell without a single wound. This is clearly the work of a curse-type ability. Or perhaps a forbidden neurotoxin. Therefore, you have violated the rules. According to our laws, if a challenger uses forbidden arts, the results are void and the prize is confiscated. The crowd gasped. To be honest, everyone understood exactly what was happening here. Jin Yi wasn't just after the Golden River anymore. He wanted Lin and secret technique. He intended to swallow the treasure and the man. Then, acting with a false sense of generosity, he added one more thing. However, I can give you a way out. Hand over your secret. I will let you live, and perhaps even make you my most valuable dog. Lennon stood there, slowly raising his head. In that moment, the last shred of patience he had for their rules finally shattered. He had played their game. He had bled for his 100-kill streak, only for the house to tell him the win didn't count. There was nothing left to say. He let out a soft, dry laugh, which, naturally, infuriated Jin Yi, who immediately ordered his men to take him, dead or alive. I want his secret. In the next heartbeat, the 8 alloy gates around the octagon rose simultaneously, revealing teams of armed men. Clad in black exoskeleton armor and wielding Gauss kinetic rifles, these enforcers poured out of the darkness like a rising tide. 100 dark muzzles and blue-glowing sights locked onto him at once. Every single one of them was a battle-hardened veteran. The crowd completely collapsed into panic. Everyone knew that once the cleaner squad was deployed, the arena became a literal slaughterhouse. And there we see Lennon, standing in the center of the circle, as the elite troops prepared to turn the floor red. He slowly discarded the shattered remains of his daggers. Since they wouldn't follow the rules, his word would now be the only law. Fire. At the captain's command, 100 Gauss rifles spat tongues of flame, unleashing a dense hail of projectiles toward him. The alloy slugs tore through the air, weaving a web of death from every direction that left absolutely no room for escape. His figure was instantly swallowed by smoke and fire. To be honest, the soldiers likely thought the job was already finished. But as the gunfire ceased, he remained standing there, completely unharmed. Within a 1-meter radius of his body, something was very wrong. Space itself had warped into a bizarre, distorted shape. Thousands of alloy slugs, capable of piercing tanks, were simply stuck. They had been swallowed by that distorted zone, suspended in midair like insects trapped in ancient amber. It was an impossible sight. Their kinetic energy had been stripped away, and as they ground against each other in that narrow space, the slugs began to glow red-hot. The air hummed with the vibration. The soldiers froze. They had seen energy shields and bulletproof armor before, but never this. They had never seen a man make bullets stop dead in the air. This wasn't just a defense, it was a divine prohibition. He raised his hand toward that suspended storm of death and slowly closed his fist. Now, he whispered, it is my turn. Lennon turned suddenly, his arms sweeping across the air as he hurled that pocket of space, trapping thousands of red-hot slugs, directly toward the left. He aimed for the densest formation of the enforcers. In that instant, space snapped back to normal, and all that stolen kinetic energy was returned at once. There was no sound of gunfire this time, only the collective, piercing shriek of the air being torn apart as the projectiles flew. The slugs traveled back even faster than they had arrived, forming a fan-shaped curtain of glowing red death that swept through the room. Dozens of soldiers in the front row didn't even have time to react before their exoskeleton armor, bones, and flesh were completely shredded. In a heartbeat, their defenses became a tragic joke. Great clouds of crimson mist erupted, dyeing the entire battlefield a fresh, gruesome red. The survivors were instantly driven mad by terror. Some retreated, some screamed, and others desperately threw high-explosive grenades and incendiaries. They tried to bury him under overwhelming firepower, but Lennon didn't even look at the explosions, the flames, or the shockwaves. Instead, we see him charge forward, strolling through the sea of fire as if taking a walk in the park, closing in on the panicked ranks. His gaze locked onto the captain who was trying to flee. Then, he released his grip on the compressed space, returning their own gift with interest. The explosive energy, packed to its absolute limit, detonated into a 10-meter-wide fireball of pure death centered right on the captain. The blast swept in every direction. A dozen nearby soldiers were vaporized instantly, their heavy armor turning to gas along with their bodies. Those on the periphery were ignited by the heat before being torn apart by shrapnel. Their screams were drowned out by the thunderous roar. This was no longer a battle, it was a massacre. Lin An's control over space had turned him into the most terrifying mobile arsenal imaginable. The stronger the enemy's fire, the more lethal his counterattack became. Their numerical advantage and suppressive fire meant nothing now. Before the true laws of space, their tactics were merely a joke. Soon, the arena was filled only with the sounds of wailing and burning. The captain, who had somehow survived the first blast, dragged his charred body across the floor, crawling toward the VIP boxes on all fours. He cried out for help. While inside the box, Jin Yi collapsed into his sofa, staring at the monitors showing the carnage below. His face was a mask of pure, naked fear. He had originally thought Lin and just possessed some hidden killing technique, but now he knew better. He finally realized he hadn't provoked a man with a few secret tricks. He had provoked a total monster. And so he turned and ran. However, he had barely taken 2 steps when a thunderous crash echoed behind him, and the captain of the guards was sent flying like a ragged sack. The man was kicked right through the door of the VIP box, rolling to a stop at Jin Ye's feet. He let out a final rattle, pointing a trembling finger toward the entrance. Then his head slumped, and he drew his last breath. Jin Yi turned slowly, his body stiff with dread, as Lin stepped through the dust and smoke. He was covered in grime and gore, and that pale, smiling mask had long since been stained a dark, gruesome red. Behind it, his eyes remained terrifyingly calm. Without a single word of wasted breath, Lin walked up to the special reinforced glass, the kind said to withstand armor-piercing rounds, and slowly raised his right hand. He pressed his thumb gently against the surface. A second later, starting from the center of his palm, something impossible began to happen. A web of black cracks began to spread across the glass. This wasn't a normal shatter. It was space itself being torn apart right before our eyes. Jin Yi finally snapped, screaming for him to stop. He babbled about the glass's military pedigree, offered mountains of money, and even invoked the power of the Wang family. He pleaded for his life, mentioning every powerful connection he had. To Lin, however, these words were less than a whisper of wind as he curled his fingers. With a strange, muffled crack, that massive slab of reinforced glass and the half-meter-thick alloy wall were gripped by an invisible force. Lin literally tore the section out, leaving a perfect 3-meter-wide circular hole in the wall. The massive chunk of masonry crashed to the floor with a heavy thud. The impact shook the entire VIP box, and with it, Jin Ye's last shred of security was pulverized. He collapsed to his knees, his spirit utterly broken. He began to kowtow frantically, his face a mess of tears and snot, begging Lin not to strike. He promised everything. The 4-section ice-breaking gold box was in the safe. Lin grabbed him by the hair, hoisting him off the ground and dragging him toward the hidden compartment like a heavy sack of laundry. After the iris and fingerprint scans were completed, the safe slowly hissed open, and a wave of bone-chilling cold instantly filled the room. Trembling violently, Jin Yi pulled out a blue metal box and held it above his head with both hands. Lin took it and flipped the lid with one hand. Inside sat a fist-sized, crystal-clear golden core, with what looked like an icy blue storm swirling within. It was a sight to behold, truly. The purity of that cold energy caused the spatial power within Lin to vibrate slightly. Recognizing it as the real deal, he immediately stored it in his personal space. Seeing the item handed over, Jin Yi actually had the nerve to keep begging, even trying to use his ties to the provincial Wang family as a shield for his life. Unfortunately for him, an invisible blade flashed through the air before he could finish. His voice cut off instantly as his head and body parted ways. The head rolled across the floor with a dull thud, and a spray of blood splattered across Lin's lower half as he kicked the twitching corpse aside. The air was cold and indifferent. To Lin, it didn't matter who the man was. Leaving roots behind only leads to being consumed later. He had learned that lesson long ago in the dark alleys of the slums. Having secured the item, he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he casually sliced open the main gas line in the corner, and the high-pressure hiss of escaping gas quickly filled the entire VIP box. Next, he flicked a lighter and tossed the small flame into that luxurious, sinful tomb, and then he simply walked away. He turned and left without a single backward glance. Seconds later, a world-shaking explosion erupted from the top floor. Flames and shockwaves swept through the underground arena like an angry dragon, twisting steel and collapsing walls as it went. This place, which had swallowed countless lives, finally met its deserved destruction while Lin walked toward the light. Step by step, he climbed the stairs to the surface. As he pushed open the heavy iron doors, the piercing morning light hit his face. He slowly removed the smiling mask, now stained a dark red, revealing a young face that was pale, yet sharp and resolute. The ice-breaking gold box was finally his. Now, it was time to save his sister. Everything else could be settled another day. In the early hours of the morning, he practically burst into the hospital. The doctor on duty was still half asleep until Lin arrived. When he slammed the cold box containing the 4th-tier core onto the desk, the doctor woke up instantly, his voice trembling with shock. A 4th-tier core, it was unheard of. Soon, the entire intensive care unit was ablaze with lights, filled with top surgeons and sterile labs. Dilution procedures and energy guidance, a series of operations that should have been impossible at this hour, were set into motion by the core's power. Lin stood outside the sterile observation room, his eyes fixed on his sister, Ling, through the glass as she lay on the bed. The diluted, icy blue energy was slowly injected into her body through precision instruments. At first, the situation remained tense. The life signs on the monitor fluctuated wildly, and he could almost hear his own heart pounding. However, after a long moment, a change occurred. The fatal frost on her face began to slowly recede, and the blue tint on her lips started to fade as color returned. Her heartbeat, which had been so weak it was almost gone, began to climb steadily from 30 to 40, then 50 beats per minute. The readings finally stabilized within a normal range, and the harsh alarms that had filled the room began to fall silent, one by one. As the first light of dawn filtered into the hallway, the lead doctor finally removed his mask, looking exhausted yet visibly moved as he whispered, "It's a success." Her bodily functions were stable, and all she needed now was rest, a realization that felt like the final pillar of support being pulled from Lin En's weary frame. The nerves he had kept taut for half a month finally snapped, and an overwhelming wave of fatigue instantly flooded his body as he sat by the hospital bed. Watching his sister sleep with a hint of color finally returning to her face, his eyelids grew too heavy to hold, and he drifted into a deep slumber. It was the most peaceful sleep he had known in a very long time, yet he had no idea that the massive fourth-tier energy inside Ling's body was not yet finished. After stabilizing her life, a tiny, residual fraction of that incredibly pure energy remained, a lingering thread of power looking for a path. Following an inexplicable blood connection between the siblings, it flowed silently into Lin En's body. For a fourth-tier core, this remnant was insignificant. But for the young man in his current state, it was more than enough to trigger a true metamorphosis. We don't know how much time passed before he stirred. He woke with a violent start, feeling a sharp, piercing pain as if a steel needle were being driven through his mind. But then, the sensation shifted. The agony was completely overtaken by a sudden, soul-elevating pleasure. He could feel it clearly now. Something deep inside was changing. The invisible barrier that had restricted his spatial ability was shattered by this foreign energy, and his mental threshold broke through its limits. His control over space exploded in intensity. He immediately checked his ability core, and in that moment, his breath hitched in his throat. The storage space, which had previously been only a single cubic meter, was being torn open and expanded by an invisible, giant hand. The volume grew at a frantic pace, 2 cubic meters, 5, then 10. In a matter of seconds, the tiny box of a space had transformed. It had expanded into the size of a warehouse. However, as we are about to see, that wasn't even the most significant change. At the moment the expansion finished, a brand new law was quietly etched into the core of his space. With a mere thought, he decided to test it. He pulled a glass of water from the nightstand into his space, and then he activated that new, mysterious imprint. There was a faint hum. The rippling surface of the water instantly froze solid, and even a single droplet caught mid-air remained suspended in a haunting, eerie stillness. Time itself seemed to have been paused within that pocket of space. Lin En realized the gravity of this new power, absolute stasis. Any non-living object or energy form placed within the space would have its state absolutely locked. However, if a living being were forcibly pulled inside, its life functions would drop to near zero, effectively trapped in a pocket of frozen time. And what, we might ask, does this actually mean? It means that from now on, he can store more than just supplies. He can store warheads, flames, and shockwaves, or even snatch an enemy's attack mid-air. He could pull an incoming strike, or even a limb, directly into his space. More terrifyingly, he could briefly store a part of his own body and release it from another point, creating a bizarre, teleport-like strike. This was no longer just a quantitative upgrade, it was a qualitative evolution. Lin En clenched his fists, feeling the unprecedented surge of spatial power within him as a cold light flickered in his eyes. Now, even if he faced a true fifth-tier powerhouse head-on, he wouldn't have to gamble his life. And right at that moment, the public television outside the hospital room began broadcasting a high-spirited news report. Today was the day. The highly anticipated National Joint Entrance Examination for Elite Ability Academies had officially commenced in the capital city of Jingqing. Hundreds of S-rank elites and geniuses from the Federation's top families and military systems had already gathered in the capital. They would spend the next month in fierce competition for a spot in the Federation's 3 most prestigious universities. On the screen, a series of young, proud, and glamorous faces flashed by, all of them dressed in magnificent combat uniforms. Behind them were prominent family crests, and above them, camera flashes fell like rain. They looked like people born to stand above the clouds. Lin En stood by the window, quietly watching the screen as his gaze grew colder. These people were the true favored children of this world. Resources, noble birth, prestige, they held it all in their hands from the moment they were born. Meanwhile, he had crawled out of the ruins, rising step by step through dark alleys and life-or-death struggles. But that was exactly why he had to go. He walked into the bathroom, thoroughly washing away the grime and blood before changing into a black combat suit he had scavenged from a literal battlefield. Finally, he strapped the long, narrow combat blade, the one he had borrowed from the safe the night before, onto his back. He took one last look at his sister sleeping soundly on the bed. She had survived. Now, it was his turn to settle accounts with the world. He pushed open the hospital doors, and though the midday sun was blinding, he merely squinted and stepped out into the streets of Jiangxing. To him, this dark and struggling place was nothing more than a starting zone. The true hunting grounds, as we are about to see, were in Jingxing. The game of teaching those high and mighty geniuses the true meaning of despair was only just beginning. And who could blame him, really?